my name is Mara Linskey-Deegan, and I am the Associate Curator and Registrar here at the Charles H. MacNider Art Museum in Mason City, Iowa. And today I'm going to be doing a lunch and learn, and our topic today is matting works of artwork. And we're going to be talking very little bit about why we mat and how we mat, and then I'm actually going to do a demonstration to kind of show you how I would mat something that was coming into the museum if it needed to be matted. So the first question is, why do you want to mat a piece of artwork? And what is a mat? That might be the first question. So a mat is just a kind of a thicker piece of paper that is almost like cardboard. It's a little bit differently structured in that it doesn't have the corrugations in there. It's just a bunch of kind of harder pieces of paper, like cardstock, squished together really tight to make a board like this. And like I said, people ask a lot, well, why would you mat a piece of artwork? Well, there are many reasons, but today I'm just going to talk about two. The reasons that we do it here at our museum is one, to protect the piece of artwork, and two, to make it look more aesthetic, more pleasing to you when you come into our museum to look at the pieces. So when we're talking about protection, this is my example today. Now you'll notice that this is a copy that I got, so I am touching it with just my bare hands, and I'm still wearing my rings and my watch. Usually if I'm handling artwork, I take off my rings and my watch or wear a glove or something over it, but because this is just from a magazine, I can touch it with my hands. So we have this nice piece of artwork here, but it's on a piece of paper, and that is true. A lot of our prints are like that, drawings. Sometimes paintings are on pieces of paper, and then photographs would be on pieces of paper. And you can see paper is floppy. And so if you're having to move this around, store this, and it's floppy and it's stacked or something, it can get wrinkled, it can get bent, the corners can get messed up. So we would want to protect that. And like I said, our board here, our mat board, is pretty hard. It flops around a little bit, but not like this paper does. You can kind of see the difference. So if we have this great piece of artwork put between two mats, boom, there we go. It's nice and secure. It's not going to get bent. It's not going to get folded. It's not going to get creased. Nothing really can happen to it. But the problem is you can't see it. So that's why we mat or cut a window in one of the mats so that you can see that piece of artwork through. So again, we're going to be talking about how we do that just a little bit later on. But now you kind of know why we would mat. The other reason is aesthetic. If you're looking at a piece like this, and you have this right here, and you just have a frame around it, it looks fine. A lot of people do that. But sometimes it's hard to get in and see the details, to see anything, because the frame is right there next to it. So if you have a mat, it gives your view kind of almost your eyes a little bit of a break between the piece of artwork and the frame, and the piece of artwork and the piece next to it. And when we go and take a walk around some of the pieces down in our collection, you can kind of see how that mat is almost like a buffer between the piece of artwork you're looking at and the piece next to it, or even the frame. So the other thing we're going to talk about is kinds of mats. Most mats are what we like to call 4-ply. This is the standard. This is about how thick a 4-ply piece of mat board is. There are also 2-ply and 8-ply, which are pretty common. And then they do go up from there. So there are 16-ply and even bigger than that. That is not as common because it does get quite thick. 4-ply is nice because it's rigid, or it has a little bit of give, but not too much. But it's not so thick that you have to get a special frame or something because it's so thick in the frame there. So it's a little bit thicker than paper, but not that much thicker. So that's mostly what we use. You can also see that the mat board we're looking at here is double-sided. It is black on one side and white on the other. Most of the time with this mat board, we use the black side facing out, and then the white side is on top of the piece of artwork. But if we wanted to, I could flip it over and cut the mat so that the white side is facing out, and that's something we can do too. We also have mat board here at the museum that is white on one side and ivory on the other side. And that's actually the mat board we use the most for our actual permanent collection. A lot of times we use this mat board for matting and framing wall text. We also use it a lot for our school art show that we do every year in March. This is great mat board. We like it. We get it from Dick Blick. And there are lots of different places, including Hobby Lobby and a lot of places online that you can order mat board from. This is Crescent mat board, which is the kind we use, and it works pretty well. So like I said, this is black on one side, white on the other. We also have one that's white on one side, ivory on the other. But you can get pretty creative. They make mat boards in a variety of colors. Everything from bright yellow, green, purple, blue. They even make textured mat boards. Some of them have a texture on a solid color. Some of them are even maybe a little bit multicolored. And I've even seen mat board that's kind of velveteen, where it has like a three-dimensional quality to it. And also you will see every once in a while, sometimes with paperworks, but a lot of times with paintings, they'll be matted with a fabric mat that almost looks kind of like a canvas. And that'll be around. That was really big, I think, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a little bit in the 80s. It still is around here and there, but most of the pieces in our collection that are matted that way are from that era. We don't usually do that too much anymore, just because sometimes it can be hard. If anything does get on it, it's hard to get off again, where the paper is easy just kind of to brush off. The other thing we do try to do all the time is use acid-free, what we call archival mats. And again, it's acid-free, it's also lignin-free, and it is color safe, so color fast, so that if it does have a color like a black, if you were to drop water on this accidentally, it's not going to bleed into the paper underneath it. Of course, we wouldn't want to get water anywhere near a piece of artwork, but you know, things happen, and so if water did get on that, we wouldn't want the color to bleed out of the black and into the paper underneath it. And that's pretty important. When we're talking about acid-free, that's important because what can happen when you have a mat cut with a window like this, which we will be showing you how to do in just a bit, if it's acidic, the inner part, the core, which is in this little part right here, I don't know if you can see that, I might hold this up so you can kind of see that, beveled little area right there, that touches the actual piece of artwork. So if this part right here is acidic, that acid gets onto the paper. And when it gets on that paper, it can leave a dark mark. We call it acid burn. And it's usually kind of a dark brown color, and it'll leave a ring, well, not a ring, a square, right around where the mat touches the piece of artwork. And you don't want that, because that's really hard to get rid of, and sometimes it can be permanent. The other thing we don't want to have in the mat board is lignin. Lignin is something that comes in paper. It's part of the tree. But if you leave it in there, what happens is over time, and sometimes not too long of a time, it will yellow the mat board and sometimes the paper underneath and make it very brittle. What I like to think of is newsprint. Newsprint, like from a newspaper, has a lot of acid in it, but it also has a lot of lignin. And if you think about maybe finding an old piece of newspaper, how yellow and how brittle it is, especially if it's folded, when you try to unfold it, how it'll crack and little bits will come off. That's what happens if you have lignin and acid in your mat board. And of course, we don't want that to happen. So we get archival mat board that doesn't have those. That way, hopefully it'll last for a lifetime. There's one more little point I like to talk about. A lot of times people who sell mat board have the buffered and the unbuffered options. And they also have that if you're going to get tissue paper to wrap around artwork. That's always an option, buffered versus unbuffered. And a lot of people think, well, I don't know the difference. Is there a difference? I think I should get buffered. That sounds good. And that is true, but really buffered is used to take things that are basic, which means non-acidic, and keep them from getting acidic. Things like leather, feathers, anything that's animal-based, it really helps them from getting acidic and drying out and falling apart. So with tissue paper, if you're storing something like a leather belt that you really want to keep, that would work fine. But with most pieces that we are going to mat here at the museum, unbuffered works fine. Maybe the only thing that we might think about maybe using buffered on is certain kinds of photography, because again, they use some of those animal products in the development of the film. So some photography has a basic element to the paper that goes along with the process of making it. That can mean that a buffered mat board would be helpful for it. But again, most of the time, for what we're doing and for what, if you're going to do this at home, unbuffered archival mat board will work for you just fine. All right, one more thing we're going to talk about is what a poorly cut mat looks like. Sometimes you'll see mats that are just all over the place, really ziggy-zaggy and stuff. Most of the time you don't see that, because if I cut a mat that was really diagonal or ziggy-zaggy and just looked really bad, I'd probably just cut a new one. But every once in a while you get a mat like this one right here. And it's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to use a background right here so you can kind of zoom in and see this. This mat was not cut totally poorly, but it does have some issues that we like to try to avoid. And one of the first issues was this mat was cut with a dull blade. You can zoom in right here, especially. I don't know if you can see this right where my finger is. You can see that little bits of the black paper on the top are sticking up a little bit. It means that the razor blade used to cut this beveled window right here was not really sharp. It was kind of dull, and just like a razor that you're using on your face or your legs, if you use a dull one, you're going to get cut more because it pulls a lot. And this is pulling off those bits of paper. So you don't get a clean cut, you get a jagged cut. And I'll sit right there so you can kind of zoom in on that. And another thing that happens quite a lot, and actually especially when you're first starting, is that the corners don't look crisp. What you want, and what hopefully we'll get when I cut my mat here, is a nice crisp corner with very nice edges. And if you zoom in, especially to this edge right here, you can see that when they were cutting the mat, the corner kind of got stuck in there, and I bet it was pulled out. So it's not nice and crisp. There's little bits of things stuck in there. And you don't want that, just because for most people, they're not even going to notice, but every once in a while, you'll get somebody who stares right at it, and then unfortunately, that's all you can see. The other thing is, on the other side, you can see that the person cutting the mat went over where they were supposed to stop, and there's little lines sticking out on the top and the bottom. Again, that's not something horrible, but when you're cutting a mat, you want to try to avoid that as much as possible, because again, it's something that just doesn't look the greatest. It's not aesthetically pleasing, but once you see it, and once you go home and kind of look around and start to see it, you're never going to unsee it. So we want to try to avoid that by having a nice sharp mat cutter. We want to make sure our measurements are nice and precise, and that when we're actually cutting the mat, which I'll show you in just a moment, that we really follow those measurements so that we don't overcut. This piece here by the artist Charles Fritz has a great example of the way that you can use some colored mats. So if you're able to kind of zoom in a little bit, you can see that the outside mat here is kind of a cream color, which is something, as we talked about, that we use a lot. But the inner two mats are actually kind of a burgundy and a royal blue. And they're just a little bit of color, and that really helps pull out some of those colors that are in this piece right here. So that's a way that you can use colored mats. And this piece here by Bob White is another way that you can use colored mat, in this case black, to really make the piece pop. Now this piece is a great piece, but it's pretty detailed and kind of small. And I think from across the room, if you were to look at it, and it had a whiter cream mat, it would kind of blend in. But with this nice, bright, I would say, black mat, it really makes it pop, and it also pulls out all of the black lines that are in this small intricate drawing to help you really see the piece better. So this piece by Jacob Lawrence has a great example of what an 8-ply mat looks like. And actually this is a doubled 8-ply mat. And what that means is that there's a mat on the inside, and then there's another mat that goes over the top of that mat. They're both 8-ply, so it makes it quite thick. And with a large, bold piece like this, it really kind of highlights the piece without being too subtle, i.e. too small. So you're going to go ahead and zoom in here, and you can see how thick the mat looks in comparison to the piece. So this piece by Lee Krasner has a pretty subtle, which means just a little bit, asymmetrical mat. And what that means, we talked about this before, but what that means is that all sides of the mat are not equal. The bottom and the top are equal, and the two sides are equal, but they're not equal to each other, which means they're not all the same size all the way around. And you can see how, especially with one that's a rectangle, it kind of just gives a little bit of interest to the piece itself, because your eye is kind of drawn into the middle and not necessarily to the mat. So here are 3 great examples of just a little bit of color differences and a little bit of size difference that actually makes a huge difference in the way you view the piece itself. Especially with this one right here. It's actually kind of a small piece, but with such a large mat, it draws your eye into the piece, and it kind of gives you some space around the edge here to kind of let your eyes, you know, settle because it's so dense in the middle there. And this one, I think they did a great job of using a cream mat, which is one we use a lot, but it's a little bit different than a white mat. What I like to do is look at a piece and think, how would that look with a white mat? And then how would it look with a black mat? And then maybe even a colored mat, like a bright yellow or something, and kind of try to picture that in my mind. But I think with this kind of off-white, almost ivory color, especially because the piece has a nice white border, it really nicely corresponds with the colors that are in the piece, but it doesn't pull away from those colors. And then you can see here how a nice bright white mat can help this piece really stand out. Now this piece I think would have looked great with a black mat, and I think it would have looked fine with a cream mat, but I really like the white mat because it really, like I said, draws your eyes into those colors. And we're going to look around our print gallery where a lot of the pieces are matted and just get a sense of the different sizes and different colors and how they relate. We even have a piece in this grouping that you're going to look at that's not matted at all, and that's the Alex Katz, which is the reclining figure. And you can kind of see how it's not matted, it's floated, but I think it goes along with everything else pretty nicely. So we kind of talked about why we mat, we kind of talked about what a mat is, and now we're going to talk about how we mat a piece of artwork. But before we can get into that part, we're going to talk about the tools we need to actually make a nice mat for our little sample piece of artwork there. So what we use is a mat cutter. There are very fancy versions of mat cutters around. I can tip this up so you can kind of see it. This is not a very fancy one, but this one works wonderfully. It's kind of a one that you can move around and take different places. It's a portable mat cutter, we like to call it, but it's nice because we can use it here in our studios. I can use it actually in the galleries if I need to cut something really quick while I'm putting up a show, but it's not something that's really hard to move. There are mat cutters that are quite large that get mounted to a table, and those are like used at framing shops and places where they mat all the time in one space. We don't do that, so it's nice to have one that's portable. So this mat cutter is actually a Logan mat cutter. They're all different brands. The Logan one just worked nice for us, and it was easy to learn how to use. It actually came with a little DVD for our computers, and we were able to watch just a little quick thing to show you how to use this one. Most mat cutters, once you know how to use one, it translates pretty well, but it's always nice if it has some nice instructions. on there. So again, this is the actual cutting board. The actual cutters are right here. We have this one right here, which is a mat knife. This is what we call a straight cutter. This will cut a nice straight edge. This is mostly used to cut the edges around the outside of the mat. So I would use that one right there to cut this part right here to make it nice and straight. And then this is what we use to cut the window, which is the center part right here. And it is beveled. You can see when you look at it kind of from the side that it's at an angle like this, where this one is going to go straight down. This one actually goes in with my hand at an angle just to the side, so that it makes what we call a beveled window cut. So when you look at this, you can see that it's beveled down so that you can see a little bit of the inner core. So I'm not really sure if the bevel makes any difference to, like I said, the archival quality, the safety of the piece. It just makes it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing to have that just a little bit of interest there. I have seen mats that are cut straight. It works. I just like the beveling a little bit more. And actually some mats get a little bit fancy where they have an inner core of maybe black or a different color, just to kind of give it a little pop. There are a few other things that we use when we're cutting mats. One of them is a ruler. It's always good to know the measurements that you're cutting. This is good for measuring the piece of artwork, but also the mat. And then we also have some scissors. Sometimes you just need scissors to cut things like archival tape. We have this nice archival tape that we use to either tape down the piece or tape down, and I'll show you varieties of ways you can adhere the piece of artwork to the backing, but the tape will definitely help with that. And then we always have a pencil and some scratch paper. If you want to too, if you're getting really technical, you can get a calculator. Sometimes the measurements, especially when you're dividing fractions, can get a little bit crazy. So sometimes that helps. But for today, we're just going to have some basic measurements, so it shouldn't be too crazy. But it's always good to have a pencil and a piece of scrap paper so you can make notes. And sometimes I even make notes on the back of the mat board. But we always do use a pencil and not a pen. That's because you will definitely erase a lot when you're doing this, especially when you're first learning. I have had several times when I've gone to cut a mat and then I've realized, oh my goodness, I made the markings all wrong and have to erase them and make the new ones. So it's so much easier if you just do it with a pencil. Yeah. The last thing we're going to talk about is this piece of mat board right here. This is just a scrap piece of mat board and you're like, why? What is that for? What would I use this for? This is actually what we call a slip sheet. And we actually only use this when we use the bevel cutter, this one right here. We actually put it underneath, and I'll show you this when we actually do it, but you put it underneath right here so that when you cut your beveled window edge here, it makes it nice and smooth and it keeps this edge right where it's supposed to be, so it doesn't hop around at all or go in and out. It just stays nice and smooth with the tip of this getting stuck into this mat board. Then the cutting edge is able to cut the window nice and straight, and it just helps make it look a little bit nicer. We don't use it when we cut the straight edge, only the beveled edge. All right, when we're going to cut that window in our mat board, we have to first determine what size of mat board we need and also what size the window is going to be. When we talk about mat board, usually what we do is to figure out how big of a window we want first, and then that determines how big the mat board is. So it's kind of a reverse process. And what I mean is, like I said, I'll use my example here. This is the window, the hole there. So what we want to figure out is how big we want the edges. And if we want the edges to be equal, or if we want maybe one side to be bigger or smaller. You can do that, and that looks sometimes kind of good, and it's called asymmetry. Sometimes you'll have the top and the bottom will be bigger than the sides. Sometimes you'll have the sides and the top all one size, and then the bottom is bigger. The only thing you don't want to do is have every single side all different sizes, because then that makes your brain hurt, unless that's what you're going for. Every once in a while, people like to get crazy, but most of the time you want the top and the bottom to be equal, the sides to be equal, the whole thing to be equal, or just the bottom to be bigger. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure my artwork to be matted. I'm going to see how big it is, and I'm also going to decide at the same time if I want a little channel around the piece or if I want it to be matted right up next to it. All right, so I'm going to look at my piece here. It's a nice piece by Edward Hopper. I like it there. A man and his dog and a field next to a house. I decided that I think I want to have just a little bit of white around there. I don't want the matte to go right up there. So I have to factor that in when I am making my measurements. So I'm going to measure the piece. This time I am going to go right to the end of the piece right there. And I'm deciding that there's some words on the bottom. I want those included. So it looks like from the top to where the words stop is 7 1/4 inches. So now I have to decide how much white space I want around there. I think I probably want around 1/4 on the top and the bottom, 1/4 of an inch. So then what I have to do is say, okay, I have 7 1/4 so far. I have to add 2 more fourths. See, this is where the math gets in here. So that would be another half. So that would be 7 3/4. What I have to do is take my handy dandy piece of pencil here and write down 7 3/4. And I also need to make a note to make sure I know if I'm going up or down or side to side, because sometimes your piece of artwork, like this one, are not going to be the same size. So I just make some little arrows to make sure I remember that that's the top and bottom measurements, not the side to side measurements. So it's pretty easy there. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing with the side to side. So the piece itself, the actual artwork, is 7 inches even. Now remember, I added 1/4 of an inch on the top and 1/4 of an inch on the bottom on this one. So I'm going to do the same thing on the sides, just so that white channel is even all the way around. So if I have 7 and I need to add 1/4 and 1/4, that's 7 1/2. So far our math is good. And then again, I make my little arrows just for my own notes so I remember which way that is. So that helps me decide how big the window is. And that in turn tells me how big I need to cut my mat board. Usually we probably do most of our mat boards at about 2 to 3 inches. And what that means is the part that's going around, this part right here, is going to be approximately 2 to 3 inches. Usually that's what we go with. If we're going to do something like this, where we want it to be kind of standardized, I'm going to add 2 inches to however big I want my window. So my window is going to be 7 3/4 by 7 1/2. So that means I want 2 inches all the way around. So I have to remember not just to add 2 inches, but to add 4 inches to both of these measurements. That will get me 2 inches on either side for total. So I take 7 3/4. Here you go, you're going to test my math. And I'm going to add 4 to that. So 7 3/4 plus 4 is 11 3/4. I think. And same thing, 7 1/2 plus 4 is 11 1/2. So that right there is how big I'm going to cut these pieces of mat board. So now I can get measuring. So I have my measurements down here. I have my 11 1/2 by 11 3/4, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it with the straight cutter. Again, I don't need that slip sheet underneath because that's when I'm doing my straight cutting. And the nice thing about this is right here it has a nice straight edge, so I don't need to put a ruler on there to make a nice straight edge. I already have my lines drawn using my ruler. So all I have to do is just stick it in there and line the line up with the edge of my cutter right here. And there is a little channel underneath there where the edge of my cutter can go down in where it won't cut anything, i.e. it won't cut into the board. So I go ahead and open that up here. I get my thing ready. I put my hand down. This is also a straight edge, but it also is something that holds the paper in place. So I push down on that, stick this right in there, and I can pull it right across. And boop, there we go. I cut off that area right there. The next one is going to be a little bit harder just because it's a little bit smaller. It's always hard to cut a little bit thinner. So we're going to try it and see how it goes. I always try to put the big part underneath the holder because it's much easier to hold on a big section than it is on a little teeny section. So we're going to see how this goes. Hopefully it goes well. There we go. All right. And there we have our almost square section. That's going to be the top. So we have this other piece of board. What's this for? Now we talked a lot about the window and how that shows the artwork through, but we need a backing paper. And what the backing paper is going to be is just a piece of mat board that is cut the same size as the one you're going to do the window in, but we're not going to cut anything else in it. There's not going to be a window or anything. It's just going to be the nice backing for the piece of artwork, the nice stable thing that the artwork was going to lay on and be attached to. Okay, so now we're ready to cut the window in the piece of mat board that's going to be the topper, or the one that's going to have the window cut in it. And actually with this Loken mat cutter, it makes it pretty nice. When I first started cutting mats, we had to use T-squares and do all this math and get it all in there right and make sure we had the right size corners, and I'll show you that in just a second. This makes it really easy. So we know that we want 2 inches, an even 2 inches all the way around. So we have this handy dandy ruler that goes on the back of our mat board. And I'm going to let the camera person come right up so that they can see there is a ruler on the back of the mat board. And all we do is slide this ruler, this is the mat cutting ruler, goes into the channels. Sometimes it doesn't like to go. And we take this part right here that says set scale and we line it up with 2 inches. So we line it up there and then we just hook it down like that. Okay. All right, and here comes the kind of fun and actually kind of necessary part. It seems kind of silly, but we do this every time, and if you do it every time, it will work well. Is you take your pencil and you just make a mark exactly where you want that cut to go. It's so much easier if you make this mark all the way down and right across. And I'm going to do that because all 4 sides are even. I'm going to do that all 4 sides. So when I'm done, I have something that looks like this. Now, you're thinking, that is a lot of pencil mark. Why do you need all this pencil mark down here? The reason is the way this bevel cutter works, it has a little line on the back there. And once we get into that, I'll show you, but you actually have to line this line up with the line on here. If you don't go all the way to the end, sometimes you won't be able to see that line. So you have to make sure that you have lines all the way to the end of the whole mat, all the way around. So it kind of looks like this. One last little check that I like to do before I actually cut the mat is, you know, the saying, measure twice, cut once. Well, I always think that's a great thing. So I always take, if I can, I take the mat board with the lines on there, and I take my piece that's going to be matted or put in the window, and I always kind of just lay it on top there to make sure that I didn't cut it too big or too small. The other thing it's always a good idea to do is to take your pencil and write in the part that you're going to keep top, especially when the top and the sides are not, it's not a perfect square. That way you make sure that the top gets on the top of the piece. All right, now it's time for our cutting. And again, because each of these segments is 2 inches, I don't have to move my ruler anytime while I'm doing the cutting part of it. The first thing I have to do is make sure and grab my slip sheet. Doesn't matter which side is up. I'm just gonna put this side up here. And all I have to do is make sure that that's gonna be covered underneath. So the slip sheet is a lot bigger than this. I don't have to worry about it too much, and it shouldn't move around too much. And then I'm gonna slide my piece to be cut right into here and make sure it's butt up against the ruler here, and you can see that the lines match up with the edge of the mat cutter. Next, I'm going to take my beveled mat cutter and I'm going to hook it on. There's a little channel right here, and I'm going to hook the little feet right there into the channel. And it still can slide because the cutter itself is not pushed down yet. So I can slide it back and forth as much as I want to, and it's not doing anything. Like I said before, there's a line on the back of the cutter. That line tells me where the blade is going to go down into the mat. So I want to make sure that that line matches up with my line right here that I had before I start cutting. Once I'm ready to go, I make sure my slip sheet is in there. I make sure my mat board is sitting there nicely. I take one hand and I push it down on this bar right here, which will hold the mat in place. I take my other hand and push that down in, and then I just slide it forward until that line meets a new line, just like that. Once those meet, I can take my thumb off and pop that back out and take that off. Then when I pull out my mat, there should be a nice cut right there. Now, if I've done this right, when I make my final cut and I go to pick up the mat board, the window will just fall right out. So we'll see if that actually happens. All right, I'm gonna make my final cut. Get that all aligned, push down. So I'm gonna pull this out. And almost. I just have a little snag right here. That's no problem, I just give it a little pull, pops right out. So there, you can see, is my final window right there. And there's always just a little bit of paper dust. I can go like that, comes right off. All right, so here's the part that makes me sometimes a little bit nervous. This is the part where I test out and make sure that I had it all right. You know, that's why I said I always double check before I do this. But I also need to make sure that both these mat boards are going the right way first. I know this one is because I wrote top on it, but I need to make sure this one is as well. Yep, looks like we have them aligned good. So I'm going to take off the top one there. I'm going to put in my piece of paper that has my art on it right there in the middle. And for right now, I'm just going to let it be loose. That way I can put my mat thing on there and just make sure that when I adjust it properly, that it'll fit in that window good. Now you can see this part isn't adjusted properly yet, but I just want to make sure that, look, when I'm done, it will actually look the way I want it to look. All right, here comes the taping part, which is actually kind of fun as well. So I'm going to move the artwork off of there for now, and I'm going to tape these 2 pieces of mat board together. This doesn't have to be elaborate. It depends on what you're doing. For me, since I'm not going to be having this matted for years and years to come, I'm just going to put a couple pieces of tape on there. But if you are thinking, you know, this is something I want to have for, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, you can definitely tape the whole seam here and then just put some little hashes of tape on there. I'm just going to do the hashes. So I'm going to put one in the middle, about there. I'll hold it. And then I'm going to put one on each end. This is just hinging the mat boards. It's keeping them so that the top mat will not move around once it's in the frame, that they'll stick together. You should do a whole other lunch and learn on framing. That's a whole other ball of wax. For today, we're just going to talk about mat. So then it should, when you close it there, make a nice little square there and make sure everything's aligned. Now sometimes it looks like it's not aligned, but once you push this down, it'll line up nicely. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to make sure that we get the piece the way we want it inside the mat. To make sure that the edges are even, everything looks good. So I know this is not going to move around now from the bottom to the top because I hinged it. So what I usually do, and again, if I'm using an actual, if I'm doing this with actual artwork that's not from a magazine, I would take off my watch, not have on my rings, but also sometimes I would wear gloves depending on the piece that I'm working with. Otherwise, I would really make sure my hands are nice and clean. And what I like to do is just grab my little piece of paper right here between my fingers really gently and just scoot that around. Then when I put down the window, I can see, oh, it's still crooked. So then I'm going to move it a little bit more. Oh, it's still a little bit crooked. Let me look. That's looking a lot better though. And I actually do most of this just by feel, and by just looking at it. If I want to get really, really technical, I can get my handy dandy ruler out here and measure and make sure that's a fourth and that's a fourth. You can do that as well. The other way, if you really wanted to do it technically, is to actually just measure from the edge of the paper and make sure that it is even, because these two should match each other and these two should match each other. You can do it any way you want. Most of the time I just do it by how it looks. But again, it depends on what you're mounting. All right, so once I get it where I want it, really carefully, I'm gonna flip this back over like that and lay it down. And then I just hold there and I make little marks, being careful not to hit the paper at each corner. That way I make sure the piece goes where I want it when I'm done. Now the nice thing is that these will be covered up by the window so nobody will see those. Even when I'm done, if they're still out there, I can erase them if I want to. But that just helps me. Then that way if the paper gets moved around a little bit while I'm working, I know exactly where it's gonna go. Now there are two ways that we're gonna talk about right now to adhere the piece to the backing board. Both of them are equally as good. People use them both. And there are plenty of ways to do them. I'm just gonna show you the basics. If you really want to get into it, I'm sure there's videos all online about how to make different kinds of tabs and how to do this. Again, when we are attaching this piece, if it was a piece of artwork that was in our collection, we would make sure and not actually make sure we didn't touch the artwork unless we were using something that could be reversible. A lot of times people use a special kind of Japanese paper that they adhere to the back with a special kind of rice adhesive that sticks but is able to be removed. Now, because this is not a piece that is in our collection, I'm just going to use some archival tape. I would not suggest using that on anything that you want to keep for years and years and years. The second way that I'm going to show you is a great way to do it because you don't actually touch the piece. All right, but this is a great way to do posters and prints and things that you want to hook really easily and kind of quickly. What we're going to do is we're going to take two pieces of tape. They can be about the same length, doesn't have to be, and we're going to use these to make tabs on the back of the artwork. That's why, again, I made little marks there so I know where it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these on the back with just a little bit sticking up, with the sticky side is going to be sticking toward the face. So that's all like that, and that's like this. So when you're done, it looks like this, and this is the sticky side. All right, then I'm going to re-hook this down, make sure I get it aligned where my pencil marks were. That's why the pencil marks were kind of handy. So that way I make sure it's still just where I want it. All right. Then I can take a couple pieces of tape right here. And I'm going to just go ahead and put those right across that top piece of tape. And that makes a nice hinge right there. Now the good thing about this is that if you did want to look at the back of the piece, if you did it this way, you can actually flip it up and look if there's writing on the back or a signature or something like that. You're able to lift it up. The next way I'm going to show you, you can't do that as easily. Now, if you did have any tape sticking out that's still sticky, you can always just cover that up with another piece of tape. For us, it's okay, because it is going to stick to the top of the mat. Or you could even make sure and cut that off with either a little razor cutter or the scissors before you hook it down. So that's a really quick, easy way to hinge a piece that you don't mind sticking something to on the back there. But let's say you have a nice piece, a print that you purchased that you want to keep for a million years, and you don't want to stick anything to the back of it, because sticking something to the back of it always runs the risk of having something bleed through or having the stickum get on there or dry up so it comes off. So you don't want to do that. There is another way, and this I would do in all 4 corners. For now, I'm just going to show you the bottom 2 corners. You're going to take a strip of paper. Oops, I'm going to use this one. Just like this. You can make different sizes and kind of figure out what works. And then all I'm going to do is just fold over one side like this. So you can see it kind of makes a triangle. And then I'm going to fold over the other side like that. So on this side, it kind of looks like this, like a little house. And on this side, it looks like a little triangle. And then I'm going to take my handy dandy scissors and just cut off the bottom like that. And what I end up with, again, the back part here doesn't have to look pretty, is a little triangle. And then what I can do with that is just slide that on like that. So you can see it covers the corner of the piece. And then all I have to do is take a piece of tape, and without touching the piece, I can take that down. And then that way it's nice and secure, but I haven't touched my artwork at all. So I make sure the tape does not touch the artwork. It only touches that piece of paper there. And there you go. That's a quick, easy way to do that. And I would do that in all 4 corners to hold this. I'm going to do in one more corner just so you can see again. Again, I take that, fold it over like that. This is kind of some fun origami there. And then I take the other side and fold it over right next to it. Again, this doesn't have to be perfectly aligned. You want to get it kind of aligned so you don't want big bunches in it. But if it's a little bit off, nobody will see it but you. So, and then just cut off those little edges there. I always like to leave a little bit sticking out there, just because it makes it easier to slide on. And then I just slide that up over there like that. Make sure that aligns in my little pencil marks. Take my little piece of paper. Oop, cut that tape. So I have a tape like this. And again, I align it, make sure I don't touch the paper. I only touch the little corner, the triangle there. So my actual paper of my artwork, if I needed to, I can then very, very gently pull it up in the middle and slide those out. That's why I said it's a little bit harder to do it this way if you wanted to look at the back. And then it is able to be slid back in and pushed down. But usually this is, oops, a little bit more permanent way of hooking the edges on. And sometimes it can get caught in the corner there. So then, whoop, there you go. So now, if I close up my thing right here, I have even edges around there and a nice matted piece. And you can see with this one, that black really makes it pop.